Hello and welcome to another Josh Plays 40k painting tutorial. Today I'll be painting a Tyranid Termagant of the new style that I've recently released with 10th edition, and I will be painting this as Hive Fleet Kraken. So let's grab some brushes and get started. So the first thing we've done here is undercoat the model with Wraithbone spray. This just gives us a nice warm undercoat to apply the paints over. And the first paint we're going to be doing is Flesh Tearers Red, and this is to pick out all that carapace and armour on the model. We're going to want a sort of small brush. So I'm using a small layer brush from the Citadel range here to pick this out, but we'll be just sort of picking out anything that is supposed to be red with the armouring. Obviously do try and be careful not to get it over the skin if you can, but it is worth just having a pot of Wraithbone to hand so that we can obviously tidy up any mistakes that we make on the way. Now obviously not forgetting that the carapace extends to the back here, sort of going down the tail. Obviously not forgetting the sort of knee pads here as well that run down, and quite importantly the crest on the top of the head. There are a couple of extra parts to remember as well, which is on the weapon here. There's a couple of crests just to be done on there as well, and the top part here. So work your way around the model. Now you shouldn't need obviously any more than just one coat with this, obviously being a contrast paint. But typically speaking, this red one I have noticed does like to pull a little bit. So when it dries, it sort of breaks just ever so slightly, so you may just need to sort of touch back in there with the red as you watch it dry. So work your way around, and then we can move on to the next step. Once you've got that Flesh Tearers Red all applied and it's all fully dry, we're going to move on to shading the skin, which is then sort of pretty much 90% of the model then covered. And what we're going to be using here is a mix of Skeleton Horde and Contrast Medium, and this is a 1:1 ratio, and then we are just simply going to apply this all over the rest of the miniature. So just going, make sure a nice sort of even coat. We don't want any sort of unnecessary pooling, but obviously enough to allow it to go into all of the recesses. Now the one part you'll want to be sure that you don't touch with this, if you can help it, is the tongue, as that will be a sort of more pinky shade. And then also on the backs of the weapon here, you'll see these sort of couple of cables going up and down from the hand. And for that we're going to be using, again, a more sort of pinky shade as well, so and a bit more of a sort of flesh shade. So we are, again, going to avoid using it on there if possible. If you do get any on there, it's not the end of the world. We can quite easily tidy that up with some Wraithbone later before coming on to applying it. So work your way around the model with the Skeleton Horde mix and get that all applied, and then wait for that to dry before moving on to the next stage. Once you've got that Skeleton Horde shade applied, we're going to move on to do a little dry brush before applying a few more shades to the miniature. Now, what we're going to be doing with this is a Ushabti Bone light dry brush over all of that skin. And for this I'm using a small dry brush, and we're just literally running this over the parts that we have already shaded with the Skeleton Horde, just to give that a little bit of lightness back, and to start picking out those raised highlights. Now do try and avoid the red if you can. It's not the end of the world if you do catch some of it, because we will be adding highlights to that as well. So this will just sort of add a little bit more of a weathered effect in that way. But naturally we don't really want the cream colours being quite so dominant on that red area. So just take carefully, work your way around the model, and we will move on to the next step afterwards. Once you're happy with that dry brush, we're going to move on to picking out some of the smaller details in that skin. For this we're actually going to be using a mix of Volupus Pink and Contrast Medium, and this is again a sort of rough 1:1 mix. And for this we're going to be picking out the sort of vents and cracks in the skin where the sort of undertoned flesh is showing through. So particularly the vent on the side of the leg here where it sort of cracks in. And again, I'm sticking with the sort of small layer brush for this, and we're just going to run the paint into that recess. You don't need too much on the brush as you can quite easily clog up the detail, which obviously we don't want to do. But then also obviously there's the ones on the arm here. There's quite a few as you work your way around the model. There's some on the gun, and then also we're going to be picking out these sort of open fleshed areas between the obviously the knee joints here and where the feet are at the end of the legs. So carefully work your way around. You do want to try and maintain a nice fine point on your brush as you are doing this, and we can then move on to the next shade afterwards. What we are then also going to do, sticking with that 1-to-1 mix of Volupus Pink and Contrast Medium, is apply that over the tongue of the miniature as well. Now, not all of them have their tongues out, but if you've got one like this one, which does, you can just carefully coat this over the top, and that will give a nice sort of pink shading over the top of that area. Next up, we're going to be moving back to Skeleton Horde, and this is to pick out and darken some of the areas that would traditionally be a little bit more sort of bone coloured. So for instance, on the backs of the arms here, there are some exposed bonework, and again they would be ever so slightly darker than the rest of the skin tone. So we're going to be picking that out, as well as the sort of spikes on the ends of the guns. There is a couple of those there that sort of look like sort of teeth hanging out. So we can go in and work that there, and then not forgetting the actual teeth themselves. Again, they would be darker than the rest of the flesh, and we can go ahead and just recoat over the tops of those just to make them a little bit darker than the rest of the outlying skin. Next up, we're going to be going in with a coating of Gillman Flesh, and this is for those sort of pipes that are coming out of the end of the gun into the arm itself. So what we left in Wraithbone earlier, as this was we just didn't really want this to start off as a brown tone before moving into this more sort of pale skin pink sort of tone that we're now going to be working on with the Gillman Flesh. So just carefully coat that over. Again, it doesn't need to be too heavy or thick going over the top, just a nice sort of light coating to get into the recesses and pick out the details. Next up, we're going to be getting the rest of the claws and feet into some colour, and what we're going to be using here is the Black Legion contrast paint, as these are sort of typically a sort of blacky grey tone on the Hive Fleet Kraken paint scheme. So we're just going to go ahead and coat those up with this. So particularly the front claws that sort of dangle behind the gun arms, and then the hoofs at the bottom here of the feet as well. So just carefully, again, I'm using a small layer brush for this, and that just sort of helps with the accuracy, as we don't really want to be getting this anywhere else. But take your time, pick out these details, and then allow that to dry, and then we can move on to some additional highlighting. So now we've got the majority of those base paints applied, we are going to move on to some highlighting. For the first off, we're going to be tackling the red carapace and armouring, and for the first colour we're going to be moving on to here is Wild Rider Red. For this we're going to be doing a sort of feathering technique, so you're going to want a nice small brush. I'm sticking with a small layer brush, but you could move on to something small if you wanted to. So if for example, if you use the Artis Opus range, a double or 000 would be an appropriate size, and will give you the nice fine lines. But the small layer brush can also do this if you take a nice sort of steady hand to the job. So we're going to be looking at the miniature, so it helps to sort of look down upon it, and then obviously draw sort of small lines across the armour panelling, and obviously the fact that this is sort of layered does help differentiate on what we're doing. So for example here we are going to just draw some little lines down the side to show like that, and you'll want to do this round the entire miniature of all the red parts, and then but do take your time as you do it. As I say, the neater this is, obviously the sharper and cleaner the finish will be. This is quite a technique that takes quite a bit of practice, and I have to admit, even myself, I am still learning and getting this right myself in terms of how thick and how small the lines need to be in certain places to try and get the desired look that we're all going for. So work your way around the red pieces, and then we can move on to the second highlight. Well, once you're happy with that Wild Rider red, we're going to do the second highlight now to the red, and that is the Troll Slayer orange, and this is just a fine edge highlight to this armouring. So we're picking out the side edges here and just gently picking out anything that would catch the light as you go around. So obviously on the armouring it is quite straightforward because they have quite defined lines and edges as to where they are. So just work your way around and pick out all those edges. Again, you stick with the sort of smaller fine tipped brush for this to obviously give you the best neatness that you can go for. The last highlight we are then going to apply is Mechanicus Standard Grey, and this is for all those black areas that we have already done, so the claws and the feet of the miniature, and this is just to do an edge highlight over those sort of raised and sharpest edges. So for the claws, sort of just running my brush down the side of those there, right down to the tip, and again for the hoof, sort of doing a slight sort of feathering technique on there, just to obviously give them a little bit more light catching areas as well. And then to finish off the miniature, we're going to get a little bit of iodine yellow, and this is to pick out the eye details. So again, straight from the pot this time, no diluting, and we're just going to carefully drop that into the eye sockets, and just slightly underneath, just to give them that sort of alien glow effect as well over the skin. So over there, and then also on the weapon itself, there's the sort of eyelet in the middle there, and the small sort of grooves on the top. So we can put all that in there, and then we would say the model is finished. And there we have a finished Termagant from Hive Fleet Kraken. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Any questions at all, please leave them in the comments below. If not, I will see you in the next one. Thank you.